never planned on working for one of the greatest tennis players in history. My background was in high-performance nutrition and wellness management. I had spent 5 years at an exclusive health resort in Arizona, where wealthy clients came to transform their bodies and reset their lives. When the resort downsized during the pandemic, I found myself scanning job boards with increasing desperation. The listing was cryptically vague. Personal wellness coordinator for elite athlete, must have nutrition background, willing to travel international, strict confidentiality required. The salary was double what I'd been making, with accommodation included. After 3 rounds of increasingly rigorous interviews, each requiring additional non-disclosure agreements, the identity of my potential employer was finally revealed. Novak Djokovic. Even with my limited knowledge of professional tennis, I recognized the name immediately. The Serbian player who had risen to become one of the sport's all-time greats. Holder of Grand Slam titles, former world number 1, known for his incredible flexibility, endurance, and mental toughness. Also known for some controversial health views and an intensity that sometimes polarized fans. This position is about more than standard nutrition or recovery protocol, explained Elena, Djokovic's chief of staff, who had conducted my final. Novak approaches his preparation holistically, integrating physical, mental, emotional, and even spiritual practice. He's looking for someone who can help maintain this system with precision while traveling between residences and tournaments. When I asked about specific responsibilities, Elena's response was intriguing. Novak has developed certain preparatory practices that he considers essential to his performance. These aren't just preference, they're precise protocols that require careful management. Your role would ensuring these consistent, whether he's at his Monaco home, his Marbella residence, or at tournaments worldwide. 2 weeks later, I arrived at Djokovic's primary residence in Monaco. As I was escorted through security and into the surprisingly modest but immaculately designed home overlooking the Mediterranean, I prepared myself for what I assumed would be the demands of a perfectionist athlete. Specific meal requirements, recovery route, training. What I couldn't have anticipated was that over the next year, I would witness something far more profound than sophisticated nutrition or physical preparation. Behind closed doors, Novak Djokovic engaged in a series of carefully orchestrated pre-match rituals that bore little resemblance to what sports psychologists typically prescribed or what the public imagined. These weren't superstitions or simple routines. They formed an intricate system of mind-body preparation that fundamentally reframed how I understood elite performance. Practices so subtle and internal that they remained invisible to opponents, commentators, and even most members of his team. And they would completely transform how I understood the nature of preparation, performance, and the hidden dimension of athletic greatness. Chapter 2. First Impression. My first day began at precisely 6:45 a.m. Elena had instructed me to meet her in what she called the preparation, a space I assumed would be a home gym or training area. Instead, I was led to a minimalist space with bare white walls, natural wood flooring, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking. The room contained none of the equipment I had expected. No weights, machines, or training apparatus, just a single yoga mat in the center, several small wooden boxes along one wall, and what appeared to be a sophisticated air filtration. This is where Novak begins each day. Elena, it's the foundation of everything else. Your primary responsibility will be maintaining this space according to precise specification. Temperature at exactly 68 degrees, humidity at 55%, air quality monitored continuously, and absolute silence in surrounding areas during his morning practice. When I asked what exactly happened in this room, Elena's response was measured. That's for Novak to share if he chooses. For now, focus on the technical requirements and schedule. The next several hours were spent learning systems, specific protocols for food preparation, detailed schedules that varied depending on whether it was a training day, rest day, or tournament day, and particular requirements for everything from water filtration to sleep environment management. What struck me immediately was the precision. This wasn't the stereotypical pampering of a wealthy athlete, but the careful calibration of an intricate system. Every element had specific parameters, measured regularly and adjusted as needed. At 11:30 a.m., Elena informed me that Djokovic would be returning from his morning training session soon and wanted to meet me. I waited nervously in the main living area, which was surprisingly understated, modern but warm, with natural materials and a notable absence of the ostentatious displays of wealth often associated with elite athletes. Novak Djokovic arrived precisely. In person, he was taller than he appeared on television, his frame lean but powerfully constructed. What struck me most was his gaze, intensely focused, yet somehow warm, giving the impression that he was fully present in a way few people manage in casual interaction. "You must be Michael," his English perfect with that distinctive Serbian accent. "Thank you for joining our team. Elena speaks highly of your background in nutritional biochemistry." "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied, trying to maintain professional composure. "I'm looking forward to supporting your performance." "Not just performance system," he corrected gently. "Integrations, the distinction important." This comment, which seemed minor at the time, would prove to reveal something fundamental about Djokovic's approach, one that distinguished him from virtually every other elite athlete I had worked with. What followed was a detailed conversation about my role, focusing particularly on maintaining what Djokovic called environmental consistency across different locations. He explained that he had developed specific preparatory practice that required precise conditions, and my primary responsibility would be ensuring these conditions were replicated exactly whether he was at home, at a tournament, or training elsewhere. "The body doesn't know time or place," he explained. "It only knows pattern, biochemical, neurological, energetic. When those patterns are consistent, performance becomes more predictable. When they are disrupted, variability increases." As our meeting concluded, Djokovic asked if I had questions. I took the opportunity to inquire about the mysterious preparation and its purpose. "It's where I cultivate presence," he replied, his expression thoughtful. "Tennis is understood as a physical game, and at some levels it is. But at the highest levels, when physical differences between players are minimal, it becomes primarily a game of presence. Who can remain more completely in the current moment under pressure?" He must have noticed my slightly confused expression, because he smiled slightly before adding, "You'll understand more as you observe the full system. For now, focus on maintaining the environmental parameters Elena has outlined. Precision matters more than you might expect." As Djokovic left for his afternoon training, I reflected on this initial impression, so different from the emotional, sometimes volatile player often portrayed in media coverage. The person I had just met was measured, articulate, and operating according to a clearly defined philosophical framework rather than mere athletic routine. Most revealing was how he discussed his approach, not in terms of tactics, techniques, or even mental strategy, but through a language of presence, integration, and systemic patterns. This wasn't the typical athlete focused on victory, but someone approaching performance through a fundamentally different paradigm. In the days that followed, I was methodically trained in each aspect of Djokovic's preparations, learning precise protocols for everything from morning hydration formulas to evening room preparation. Yet the central mystery remained. What exactly happened in that preparation, and how did it connect to Djokovic's remarkable performances on court? The answer would emerge gradually over the coming months, revealing pre-match rituals so subtle and internal that they remained invisible to the tennis world, yet so powerful they had helped transform a talented young player from Serbia into one of the greatest champions the sport had. Chapter 3. The morning calibration. By my third week managing Djokovic's wellness protocols, I had settled into the operational routines of the household. My responsibilities included maintaining environmental specifications in key spaces, preparing specific hydration and nutrition formulas, coordinating with performance staff, and ensuring various preparation spaces remained undisturbed during designated time. One such designated time was what the team simply called the morning calibration, a 90-minute period beginning precisely at 6:30 a.m. during which Djokovic was not to be disturbed except in absolute emergency. This period centered around his use of the preparation, which remained mysterious to me despite my role in maintaining its precise environmental conditions. The revelation about what actually occurred during these morning sessions came unexpectedly. A minor issue with the room's air filtrations required my presence shortly after Djokovic had begun his practice. After sending notification through Elena and receiving permission to enter, I slipped quietly to the room, toolkit in hand. What I witnessed transformed my understanding of elite athletic preparation. Djokovic sat cross-legged on the mat in the center of the room, eyes closed, back perfectly straight, hands resting on his knees with palms up. He wore simple clothing, loose cotton pants, and a plain t-shirt. No technology was present, no music, no guided meditation tracks, none of the apparatus typically associated with athletic preparation. As I silently moved toward the filtration panel to address the minor malfunction, I observed something extraordinary. Rather than the typical meditation practice I had assumed occurred in this space, Djokovic was engaged in what appeared to be a precisely structured sequence of breathing patterns. Each pattern involved specific duration ratio, particular areas of the body engaged, and slight positional shifts that seemed coordinated with the breath cycles. Most striking was the absolute precision of the practice. This wasn't casual deep breathing or generic meditation. It was a highly technical protocol executed with the same exactitude as a complex tennis. Each breath followed specific parameters that I could perceive even as an observer. Controlled duration, particular pathways, certain holding patterns, various subtle engagements of different muscle. After repairing the minor issue with the filtrations, I silently moved to leave the room. As I reached the door, Djokovic spoke without opening his eyes or otherwise moving. The system tracks the difference between intention and tension. Most people confuse the two. Startled by this unexpected comment, I paused. "I'm sorry for the disruption." "No disruption," replied calmly, eyes still closed. Posture. The practice includes accommodating external events without losing internal pattern like tennis. This brief interaction provided a glimpse and purpose of the morning. It wasn't simply or focused. It appeared to be a sophisticated system for establishing specific internal patterns that would later be maintained during the radically different conditions of competitive play. In the weeks that followed, my understanding of this practice deepened through careful observation and occasional comments from Djokovic himself. I learned that the morning calibration consisted of 3 distinct components, each serving a specific function in his preparations. The first was what he called respiration, the structured breathing I had first observed. These weren't simply for relaxation, but served to establish precise rhythms within the autonomic nervous system that would later function as reference during the stress of competition. The breath patterns create temporal framework, Djokovic explained during a rare conversation about the practice. Under competitive pressure, external time seems to distort, sometimes speeding up, sometimes slowing down. These patterns provide internal time reference that remain constant regardless of external conditions. The second component involved what he termed attention, a systematic process of placing conscious attention at specific points within and around the body in a precise sequence. This wasn't visualization as commonly understood in sports psychology, but something more fundamental, the deliberate mapping of awareness itself. Where attention goes, energy follows, Djokovic noted when I inquired about. Most players allow attention to be captured by circumstance, score, opponent, crowd, internal sensation. This practice develops the capacity to position attention deliberately rather than reactive. The third component was the most subtle and, according to Djokovic, the most essential, the cultivation of what he called inhabited presence. A specific quality of awareness was neither narrowly focused nor broadly diffused, but precisely calibrate to competitive requirements. Tennis at the highest level happens too quickly for thought, he explained, but ordinary awareness is too scattered for perfect execution. This practice develops the capacity to maintain a particular quality of presence that allows technical execution to emerge without interference from analytical thinking or emotional reactivity. What fascinated me about this was how fundamentally it differed from conventional approaches to mental preparation in sports. This wasn't positive visualization, affirmation, or pep talk. It wasn't even mindfulness as typically understood. It was a highly technical approach to establishing specific internal conditions that would later enable optimal performance without requiring conscious management during competition. Most revealing was how Djokovic integrated this practice with his physical training. The morning calibration wasn't separate from his tennis preparation, but formed its foundation, with physical training built upon the internal patterns established during these morning sessions. The body responds differently when these patterns are properly established, he explained during a conversation about training sequence. Movement becomes more efficient, coordination more precise, recovery more complete. Without this foundation, physical training alone creates force, but not integration. By my second month, I had begun to recognize patterns in how the morning calibration affected Djokovic's subsequent training. On days when the calibration was completed without interruption and according to precise parameters, his physical movement in afternoon sessions showed distinctive qualities: a fluid efficiency, responsive adaptability, and seemingly effortless precision that coaches described as Novak at his best. On rare occasions when the calibration was abbreviated, disrupted to scheduling, subtle but noticeable difference appeared in his movement, nothing be apparent to casual observers, but detectable to those who worked closely with him daily. Creates integration. Djokovic's difference without it can still perform at a high level through technical and physical capacity. But integration allows access to states of flow that transcend ordinary capability, what people sometimes call being in the zone. 3 months into my role, I understood that the morning calibration wasn't peripheral to Djokovic's preparation. It was its foundation, establishing internal conditions that everything else built upon. This wasn't a supplementary mental practice alongside physical training. It was the core system that enabled optimal physical expression. And this insight began to illuminate something fundamental about what distinguished Djokovic from other elite players. His advantage wasn't primarily physical, though his flexibility and endurance were remarkable. It wasn't purely technical, though his stroke production was exceptional. It was his systematic cultivation of specific internal conditions that allowed those physical and technical capacities to express themselves with extraordinary consistency under pressure. The morning calibration wasn't just preparation for tennis. It was preparation for a particular quality of presence that transformed how tennis itself was experienced and expressed. And this, I was beginning to realize, represented Djokovic's most significant innovation, one that remained largely invisible to opponents, commentators, and even many in his own extended. The secret wasn't what he did before match, it was who he became through these subtle, silent practices that most of the world would never witness or Chapter 4. The Sensory Reset. 4 months into managing Djokovic's preparations, I witnessed another key component of his pre-match ritual, one that provided further insight into his sophisticated approach to performance. This element became visible during my first tournament travel with the team when I was responsible for establishing his preparation protocols at the Miami Open. The revelation came the day before his first match. After morning practice, Djokovic typically reviewed match footage and tactical plans with his coaches. On this day, however, he scheduled what his calendar simply termed a sensory reset for the hour immediately following this tactical session. My responsibility was preparing a specific room according to detailed parameters: temperature at precisely 66 degrees, blackout conditions with zero light penetration, complete sound isolation, and a particular arrangement of items I had transported from his Monaco residence: a rolled yoga mat, a small wooden box containing what appeared to be sensory tools, and a digital timer with a special display. When I inquired about this preparation with Elena, her explanation was intriguing. The tactical review fills his mind with analytical information, patterns, strategy, technical adjustment. The sensory reset prevents this information from creating internal noise that would interfere with performance. It's one of the most critical transitions in his preparations. Once the room was prepared according to specifications, Djokovic entered alone, closing the door behind him. Exactly 52 minutes later, the precise duration always scheduled for this practice, he emerged, appearing notably different from when he had entered. The focused intensity that typically characterized his demeanor had shifted to a kind of alert calmness, present but not tense, attentive but not strained. Later that evening, as I assisted with preparation his pre-match nutrition protocol, Djokovic surprisingly initiated a conversation about the practice I had witnessed. "You're wondering about the sensory reset. Not a question, but an observation." "I am," I acknowledged. "It seems to create a noticeable shift in your state. Information becomes noise without proper integration," he explained, his tone reflective. "The tactical analysis provides valuable data, but if it remains as conscious thought during performance, it creates interference. The reset transforms explicit knowledge into implicit understanding." When I asked how exactly this transformation occurred, Djokovic provided insight into a practice that challenged conventional approaches to performance psychology. "The reset has 3 phases," he explained. First, sensory isolation, removing external to create space for internal process. Second, deliberate defragmentation, systematically releasing analytical thought by shifting attention to direct sensory experience. Third, integration, allowing tactical information to settle into intuitive awareness rather than remaining as conscious instruction. This explanation reflected a sophisticated understanding of how different forms of knowledge operate during performance. Rather than attempting to consciously remember tactical plans during competition, a common approach that often creates overthinking, Djokovic had developed a systematic method for transforming analytical information into intuitive understanding that could be accessed without conscious effort. In the days that followed, I observed how precisely this practice was integrated into his tournament routine. The sensory reset always occurred within 2 hours of completing tactical analysis and between 20 and 26 hours before scheduled match time, timing that Djokovic explained was critical for proper neural integration. Most revealing was witnessing the difference in performance quality when tournament conditions forced modifications to this sequence. During quarterfinal preparation, a scheduling change compressed the time between tactical analysis and the sensory reset to less than an hour. Though Djokovic adapted as best he could, his coach later noted subtle differences in his execution during the match, nothing catastrophic, but small lapses in tactical implementation that weren't characteristic of his usual performance. The system requires proper sequencing and timing, Djokovic explained afterward. Like digestion, consuming excellent nutrition too rapidly or in the wrong order reduces its benefit. Information requires similar processing time to be properly integrated. This insight illuminated another dimension of Djokovic's preparation philosophy, one that treated information, sensation, and attention as elements requiring precise management similar to physical training or nutrition, where many athletes focused primarily on acquiring more information or developing greater tactical understanding. Djokovic had developed sophisticated methods for optimally processing and integrating that information once acquired. The sensory reset wasn't merely relaxation or mental clearing. It was a technical practice for transforming one form of knowledge, analytical, into another, intuitive, through a precise protocol of sensory manipulation, attention management, and neural integration. As my understanding of this practice deepened, I began recognizing its effects in Djokovic's match performance. His legendary ability to adapt tactics mid-match without apparent conscious calculation, his capacity to implement complex strategies while maintaining complete presence in the moment, his remarkable tactical discipline without visible mental strain, all reflected the integration created through these pre-match preparations. 5 months into my role, I understood that Djokovic's competitive advantage wasn't just in what he knew, technical expertise, or what he could do, physical capacity, but in how he integrated these elements through sophisticated preparation practice that remained largely invisible to the tennis world. The sensory reset wasn't separate from his technical and tactical preparation, but formed an essential bridge between analytical understanding and embodied performance, transforming knowledge from a potential source of interference into a seamlessly integrated aspect of his play. And this revealed something fundamental about Djokovic's approach to tennis. He wasn't simply managing physical skills and mental states as separate domains, as most performance models suggested. He was systematically cultivating specific relationships between knowing and doing, between information and execution, between tactical understanding and embodied expression. The practices I was witnessing weren't adjuncts to his tennis preparation. They were its central methodology, sophisticated approaches to integration that allowed his extraordinary physical and technical capacity to express themselves optimally under the extreme pressures of elite competition. Chapter 5. The Environmental Recalibration. By my 6th month working with Djokovic, I had become familiar with many elements of his pre-match preparations. However, one particular protocol remained somewhat mysterious, despite my direct involvement in implementing what the team called environmental recalibration, a practice conducted between 90 and 105 minutes before every match. My responsibilities included preparing a specific space according to precise parameters: temperature at 70 degrees, humidity at 50%, particular lighting configurations, and a specialized arrangement that included specific sound equipment, several small containers of what appeared to be organic materials, and precisely positioned. The nature of this practice became clear during the Wimbledon Championship, where I was responsible for creating these conditions in the limited space available at the All England Club. Due to the historically protected nature of the venue and its limited modification establishing the exact environmental parameters proved challenging. When I explained these difficulties to Djokovic, he invited me to observe the actual practice to better understand its requirements. The parameters aren't arbitrary preference, he explained as we entered the carefully prepared space. They're calibration references for specific sensory systems that become performance critical under pressure. What followed was a revelation about the sophisticated relationship Djokovic had developed between environmental awareness and performance stability. The practice began with what he called sensory baseline establishment, a methodical process of engaging with specific environmental stimuli to create reference points for each sensory system. This included precisely timed exposure to particular sounds at specific volumes, tactile engagement with certain materials, carefully structured visual focus exercises, and even olfactory exposure to specific natural elements. The sensory systems need stable reference, Djokovic explained as he moved through this sequence. Without deliberate calibration, they continuously readjust based on changing environmental conditions, consuming processing capacity that should be available for performance. This explanation illuminated something profound about Djokovic's approach to preparation. Where most athletes simply tried to adapt to whatever conditions they encountered, different courts, lighting, acoustics, atmospheres, Djokovic had developed a systematic method for establishing internal sensory stability regardless of external variability. Most revealing was the second phase of the practice, which he called interference patterning. After establishing sensory baseline, he systematically introduced controlled disruption, sudden sounds, visual discontinuities, unexpected sensations, while maintaining specific attention positions and breathing patterns. Competition creates sensory interference. he explained, between elements of the practice: crowd noise, visual distraction, atmospheric changes, internal sensation. Most players are continuously disrupted by these variations, with each distraction creating micro-decisions consume mental bandwidth and fragment attention. The purpose of this practice, I realized, wasn't to eliminate sensitivity to these disruptions, an impossible goal in the unpredictable environment of professional tennis. Instead, it was to develop systematic response patterns that process these disruptions without requiring conscious management or allowing performance degradation. The goal isn't insensitivity, but stabilized response, Djokovic clarified when I asked about this distinction. Not ignoring environmental variations, but processing them through established patterns that don't disrupt performance synchronization. In the matches that followed, I observed the effects of this practice with new understanding. Djokovic's legendary ability to maintain performance stability amid chaotic conditions, crowd disruption, weather changes, momentum shifts, wasn't simply mental toughness or concentration, as commentators often suggested. It reflected the systematic preparation of specific sensory processing patterns that allowed him to absorb environmental variability without performance degradation. Most significant was how this practice integrated with other elements of his preparations. The environmental recalibration wasn't separate from the morning calibration or the sensory reset, but built upon the foundational patterns they established, creating layers of preparation that worked together as an integrated system. Each practice establishes different aspects of the same integrated state, Djokovic explained during a rare extended conversation about his methodology. The morning calibration creates the foundational pattern. The sensory reset transforms analytical information into intuitive understanding. The environmental recalibration establishes stable reference points for processing external variability. Together, they create conditions where optimal performance can emerge without interference from either internal or external disruption. This perspective illuminated something fundamental about Djokovic's approach to tennis that distinguished him from most competitors. Where many focused primarily on executing techniques and tactics effectively, Djokovic had developed a comprehensive methodology for establishing specific internal conditions within which those techniques and tactics could express themselves optimally under pressure. 7 months into my role, I understood that what I was witnessing wasn't simply pre-match routine, but a sophisticated system for performance integration, one that treated sensory process, attention management, and environmental interaction as technical skills requiring precise development similar to forehand technique or movement pattern. And this insight helped explain one of the most distinctive characteristics of Djokovic's play: his extraordinary performance stability across radically different conditions. His consistency wasn't just mental discipline or emotional control, but reflected systematic preparation of specific processing patterns that remained stable regardless of environmental variability. The environmental recalibration wasn't a supplementary relaxation practice or focus-building exercise. It was a technical protocol for establishing sensory stability that directly translated to performance consistency under the chaotic conditions of professional tennis. As my understanding of this system deepened, I began recognizing its effects not just in Djokovic's pre-match preparation, but in his moment-to-moment expression during competition. The characteristic head tilts between points, the specific gaze patterns during critical moments, the structured breathing at changeovers. These weren't merely habits or ritual, but ongoing recalibration of the sensory that had been systematically prepared before competition. This wasn't the tennis preparation I had been taught to recognize support. It was something far more sophisticated, a comprehensive approach to establishing and maintaining specific internal conditions that allowed technical skills and tactical understanding to express themselves optimally under pressure. And it helped explain how a player from a country with limited tennis infrastructure had risen to become one of the greatest champions in the sport's history, not just through physical talent or technical development, but through innovative approaches to performance integration that remained largely invisible to opponents, commentators, and even many members of his extended. Chapter 6. The Relational Attunement. 8 months into my position, I witnessed another critical element of Djokovic's pre-match preparation, one that particularly challenged conventional thinking about competitive mindset. This practice became visible during the lead-up to a major semi-final match against one of his longtime rivals. My responsibility that morning included preparing a specific space adjacent to the training facility according to detailed specifications, a particular arrangement of seating, specific lighting conditions, and the setup of what appeared to be visualization, though not the standard imagery boards or video equipment typical in sports psychology. When I inquired about this preparation with Eleanor, her explanation surprised me. This is for the relational attunement, one of the most important practices before facing significant opponents. It's not about strategy or tactic, it's about establishing specific quality of relationship with the competitor. This concept, deliberately preparing one's relationship to an opponent rather than simply preparing to defeat them, intrigued me. In professional sports, opponents were typically approached as obstacles to overcome or problems to solve, not relationships to cultivate. My understanding deepened when Djokovic invited me to bring specific materials during the practice itself, allowing me to observe the process. What I witnessed challenged everything I thought I knew about competitive psychology. Rather than focusing on his opponent's weaknesses or visualizing victory scenarios, standard approaches in competitive preparation, Djokovic engaged in a systematic process of what he called empathic attunement. This practice involved specific exercises designed to establish a particular quality of relationship with his upcoming opponent, not as an adversary to defeat, but as a co-creator in a performance. Competition is typically understood as opposition, Djokovic explained as he moved through the practice, but at the highest levels, it's actually a relationship, a dynamic interaction where both participants continuously influence each other's state and capabilities. The quality of that relationship directly affects performance quality for both players. The practice involved 3 distinct phases, each approaching the competitor relationship from different dimensions. First, a process Djokovic called recognition, systematically acknowledging his opponent's journey, challenges, and capabilities without the filtration of personal agenda or competitive narrative. This wasn't merely respect for a competitor, but a specific quality of recognition that Djokovic explained creates space for both participants to access their highest capabilities. Second, a practice he termed pattern resonance, a sophisticated visualization approach where he mentally engaged with his opponent's characteristic patterns not as weakness exploit, but as expressions to understand through a kind of internal simulation. This wasn't strategic analysis, but something more fundamental, a form of embodied comprehension that created what Djokovic described as response capacity without reactivity. Third, the establishment of what he called optimal competitive distance, a precise calibration of psychological proximity that was neither too emotionally engaged nor too detached, creating what he described as the relational field where highest performance becomes possible for both players. What struck me most about this practice was how fundamentally it differed from conventional competitive psychology. This wasn't about gaining mental advantage over an opponent or building confidence in victory. It was about establishing a specific quality of relationship that Djokovic believed created conditions for optimal performance from both participants. When the relationship quality is optimal, tennis transcends mere competition. It becomes a form of high-level communication through movement, where both players access capabilities beyond their normal limits. The match quality elevates not because we're trying to defeat each other more intensely, but because we're relating to each other through a different quality of attention. This perspective illuminated aspects of Djokovic's competitive approach that had often been misinterpreted by media and fans. His on-court interactions with opponents, the respectful gesture, the occasional mid-match acknowledgements of excellent play, the distinctive post-match ritual weren't merely sportsmanship or public relations. They were extensions of a sophisticated understanding of competitive relationship that he had systematically cultivated through these pre-match practices. In the semi-final that followed this preparation session, I observed the effects of this approach with new understanding. The match against his longtime rival wasn't just technically brilliant, but had a particular quality that commentators often struggled to articulate, a synchronous intensity, a resonant rhythm between competitors that seemed to elevate both players' performance beyond their typical capability. The quality was possible because both players were allowing it, Djokovic explained afterward during our return. When at least one participant approaches competition as relationship rather than opposition, different possibilities. When both do, though that's rare, tennis approaches its highest expression. This insight transformed my understanding of what I had observed in many of Djokovic's matches, particularly those against his greatest rivals. These weren't simply athletic contests or even psychological battles. They were sophisticated relational dances where each player's state and capabilities continuously influenced and were influenced by the others, creating an emergent quality that transcended what either could produce independent. 9 months into my role, I understood that this relational dimension represented another aspect of Djokovic's preparations that remained largely invisible to the tennis world, but fundamentally shaped his competitive approach. This wasn't merely strategy or mental preparation. It was the systematic cultivation of a particular quality of competitive relationship that created conditions for his highest performance capabilities to emerge. And this insight helped explain another distinctive characteristic of Djokovic's career: his extraordinary record in matches against the other greatest players of his era. His success in these encounters wasn't just technical superiority or mental toughness, but reflected his sophisticated approach to establishing specific relational conditions that allowed his capabilities to express themselves optimally against the sport's best players. The relational attunement wasn't a supplementary practice alongside technical preparation and physical training. It was an integral component of a comprehensive system for performance optimization, one that treated the relationship between competitors as a technical variable requiring specific preparation similar to stroke production or tactical planning. As my understanding of this system deepened, I began recognizing its effects not just in Djokovic's pre-match preparation, but in his moment-to-moment expressions during competition, the characteristic quality of attention he brought to encounters with great rivals, the specific relational gestures at critical moments, the distinctive post-point acknowledgments that maintained particular relational fields even amid intense competition. This wasn't the competitive psychology I had been taught to recognize or support. It was something far more sophisticated, an approach that treated competition not as opposition to overcome, but as relationship to cultivate, with the quality of that relationship directly influencing the quality of performance possible within it. And it helped explain how Djokovic had achieved something rare in sports history, rising to greatness not by diminishing his rivals, but by establishing relational conditions where all participants could access extraordinary capabilities, creating competitive encounters of remarkable quality and historical significance. Chapter 7. The Recovery Integration. 10 months into my position, I gained insight into a critical dimension of Djokovic's preparation system that connected his post-match and pre-match protocols in ways that challenged conventional approaches to performance. This element became clear during a particularly demanding tournament schedule that required managing recovery and preparation simultaneously. My responsibilities included coordinating what the team called recovery integration, a complex protocol implemented immediately following matches that served not just to accelerate physical recovery, but to establish specific conditions for the next performance preparation. The sophistication became apparent in the final in Turin, where the round-robin format required playing multiple high-intensity matches against elite opponents with minimal recovery. Following a grueling 3-set victory, I was responsible for implementing an intricate recovery sequence that revealed itself as far more than physical restoration. The process began with what Djokovic called pattern preservation, a 17-minute protocol conducted before he even left the venue, designed not for physical recovery, but for maintaining specific neural patterns that had been established during pre-match preparation and expressed during performance. The conventional approach treats matches as expenditure requiring restoration, Djokovic explained as he moved through. But optimal performance states aren't just physical resources to be depleted and replenished. They're complex patterns that can be maintained across performances if properly forfeited. This practice involved a systematic process of what he called state registration, using specific breathing patterns, attention positions, and sensory engagement exercises to stabilize the neural organization that had supported performance, preserving these patterns through the transition from competition to recovery. What followed was an integrated sequence that addressed multiple dimensions simultaneously. Physical recovery modalities were precisely timed with cognitive processing exercises. Nutritional protocols were synchronized with specific breathing patterns, and environmental exposure was carefully managed to support what Djokovic called system coherence across the performance recovery transition. Most revealing was how this recovery process connected directly to the next preparation cycle. Rather than treating recovery and preparation as separate phases, Djokovic's system integrated them into a continuous process where recovery protocols established specific conditions that subsequent preparation practice would build upon. The conventional model creates unnecessary transition, he explained during our return journey. Athletes move from performance to recovery to preparation to performance, each transition requiring significant adaptation energy. This approach creates a continuous cycle where recovery flows directly into preparation, eliminating disruptive transition. This perspective illuminated something fundamental about Djokovic's extraordinary consistency across demanding tournament schedule. His ability to maintain peak performance through consecutive matches against elite opponents wasn't just physical endurance or mental toughness, but reflected a sophisticated system for maintaining optimal patterns across entire competitions without the degradation typically associated with accumulated fatigue and adaptation demands. The recovery integration wasn't just about restoring depleted physical resource or mentally process completed match. It was about preserving specific organizational patterns that had been carefully established through pre-match preparation and expressed during performance, then transitioning these patterns directly into the next preparation cycle. Each match becomes part of a continuous process rather than a discrete event, Djokovic noted during a rare extended conversation about his methodology. The patterns established during preparation express themselves in performance, are preserved through recovery, and become the foundation for the next preparation cycle. The continuity eliminates the energetic cost of repeatedly building and dissolving these patterns. This approach extended beyond physical recovery to include what Djokovic called experiential integration, a systematic process for incorporating match experience into his evolving understanding without creating disruptive analytical process that might interfere with performance. Rather than conducting extensive post-match analysis that would require subsequent clearing before the next performance, a common approach in professional sports, Djokovic's system included specific practice for continuously integrating experiential information without creating the analytical residue that might disrupt performance. Analysis creates valuable knowledge, but also potential interference, he explained. This approach allows continuous learning without the performance disruption that typically accompanies analytical process. The experience is integrated directly into intuitive understanding rather than passing through explicit analysis that must later be cleared. 11 months into my role, I understood that this integrated approach to performance cycles represented another dimension of Djokovic's preparation system that remained largely invisible to the tennis world but fundamentally supported his remarkable. This wasn't simply effective recovery or thorough preparation, but a sophisticated methodology for maintaining optimal patterns across entire competitive. And this insight helped explain one of the most distinctive characteristics of Djokovic's career: his extraordinary success in demanding tournament formats that required consecutive high-level performances with minimal recovery. His dominance in these conditions wasn't just physical durability or mental resilience, but reflected his innovative approach to maintaining performance integration across entire competitive cycles. The recovery integration wasn't a supplementary practice alongside standard recovery protocol. It was a sophisticated system for preserving specific performance patterns across transitions that typically disrupt them, creating continuity where most athletes experience disruptive adaptation demands. As my understanding of this system deepened, I began recognizing its effects in Djokovic's tournament performance: the characteristic consistency across consecutive matches, the relative absence of performance drop-offs following demanding encounters, the remarkable capacity to maintain peak play throughout grueling tournament schedules that typically produce progressive degradation in even the most conditioned athlete. This wasn't the recovery approach I had been taught to implement or support. It was something far more sophisticated, a methodology that treated recovery not as restoration following expenditure, but as pattern preservation within a continuous performance process, eliminating the disruptive transitions that typically separate performance cycles. And it helped explain how Djokovic had maintained extraordinary consistency over one of the longest prime periods in tennis history, not just through physical conditioning or mental discipline, but through innovative approaches to performance integration that maintained optimal patterns across time where conventional approaches inevitably produced degradation. Chapter 8. The Precision Nutrition Sequence. 11 months into managing Djokovic's preparations, I gained comprehensive understanding of an element that had been partially visible from my earliest days, but whose full sophistication only gradually revealed his approach to pre-match nutrition. This wasn't simply about what he consumed, but involved a precisely orchestrated sequence that served multiple functions within his broader preparation methodology. My responsibilities always included preparing specific nutritional elements according to detailed protocol, but it was during the Australian Open that I finally witnessed the complete system and understood its relationship to his other preparation practices. The revelation came during preparation for a quarter-final match, when unexpected scheduling changes required adapting various protocols. As we recalibrated the timing of different preparation elements, Djokovic took the unusual step of walking me through his complete nutritional sequence, explaining not just what would be consumed, but the specific purposes and principles behind each element. Nutrition isn't just fuel, he began, outlining the system on a whiteboard in his temporary apartment. It's information that creates specific internal conditions. The sequence matters as much as the substance, and timing is as important as content. What he proceeded to explain wasn't the generic clean eating or standard sports nutrition typically associated with elite athletes. It was a sophisticated system that treated nutritional intake as a technical variable within his preparation methodology, precisely calibrated to establish specific biochemical conditions that supported his broader performance integration. The system was structured around what Djokovic called transitional states, specific phases of preparation where nutritional elements serve to facilitate particular shifts in internal condition. The first phase, implemented 4 to 5 hours before match time, focused not on energy provision but on what he called system priming, specific nutritional compounds chosen for their effects on neural communication and inflammatory regulation rather than simple fueling. This included precise combinations of amino acid, specific fatty acid, and plant compounds selected for their signaling properties rather than caloric content. This phase sets biochemical conditions that later stages build upon, Djokovic explained. Without this foundation, subsequent nutrition becomes simple fueling rather than state support. The second phase, implemented 5 to 3 hours pre-match, focused on what he termed oscillatory stabilization, nutritional elements specifically selected to modulate specific autonomic nervous system patterns established during earlier preparation practice. This wasn't about energy, but about biochemical support for particular neural states. The body naturally oscillates between different autonomic states, he noted. This nutrition doesn't override those oscillations, but stabilizes their pattern and amplitude, creating more predictable rhythms during performance. The third phase, 60-90 minutes before match time, emphasized what he called access compounds, specific combinations that facilitated particular brain states associated with optimal pattern recognition and motor execution. Again, the focus wasn't primarily energetic, but informational, using nutrition as a technical tool for establishing specific internal conditions. What struck me most about this system was how directly it integrated with his other preparation practices. The nutritional wasn't separate from calibration, sensory reset, environmental recalibration, or relational attunement. It was precisely timed to support and enhance the conditions these practices establish. Each practice creates specific patterns, Djokovic, drawing connections between different elements on the whiteboard. The nutrition supports and stabilizes these patterns, making them more resistant to competitive pressure and environmental variability. This perspective illuminated why Djokovic's nutritional approach had sometimes generated confusion or controversy. His dietary choices weren't based primarily on mainstream nutritional science, focused on fueling and recovery, but reflected a more sophisticated understanding of nutrition as information that created specific internal conditions supporting his integrated performance methodology. Most revealing was how this approach extended into the match itself, with precisely timed nutritional interventions at changeovers designed not just to maintain energy, but to support specific state qualities established during preparation. Each changeover presents a decision, he explained. Not just what to consume, but whether consumption serves the current performance state. Sometimes maintaining an established pattern is more important than addressing perceived energy needs. This insight helped explain Djokovic's extraordinary physical endurance in extended matches, not just his famous cardiovascular conditioning, but his remarkable maintenance of precise coordination and technical execution, even in fifth sets of Grand Slam final. This wasn't simply superior fueling, but reflected his sophisticated integration of nutrition into a comprehensive for maintaining optimal patterns under extreme performance. 12 months into my role, I understood that Djokovic's nutritional approach represented another dimension of his preparations that remained largely misunderstood by the tennis world. This wasn't simply clean eating or even advanced sports nutrition, but a precise methodology for using nutritional compounds as technical tools within an integrated performance system. And this insight helped explain yet another distinctive characteristic of Djokovic's career, his remarkable physical resilience and performance across matches of wildly different duration and intensity. His adaptation to these varying demands wasn't just physical conditioning, but reflected his innovative approach to nutritional timing and selection as elements within a broader methodology for maintaining performance integration across diverse competitive conditions. The precision nutrition sequence wasn't a supplementary practice alongside traditional fueling. It was a sophisticated system for establishing and supporting specific internal conditions that enabled optimal expression of technical skills and tactical understanding under pressure. As my understanding of this system deepened, I began recognizing its effects in Djokovic's match performance, the characteristic consistency across extended encounters, the relative absence of technical degradation even in physically demanding conditions, the remarkable maintenance of coordination, precision, and decision quality under extreme fatigue that typically produced significant performance decline in even the most conditioned athlete. This wasn't the sports nutrition I had been taught to implement, despite my background in nutritional biochemistry. It was something far more sophisticated, an approach that treated nutritional compounds as information that created specific internal conditions rather than simply fuel that provided energy, integrated precisely with other preparation practices to establish and maintain optimal performance patterns regardless of match duration or intensity. And it helped explain how Djokovic had maintained extraordinary technical precision and tactical discipline across some of the most physically demanding matches in tennis, not just through superior conditioning, but through innovative nutritional approaches that supported performance integration even under the extreme demands of 5-hour Grand Slam finals against equally elite opponents. Chapter 9. The Internal Cueing. In my final month working with Djokovic, I gained insight into what many in his inner circle considered his most significant competitive advantage: a sophisticated internal cueing system that maintained specific performance patterns during competition without requiring conscious management. This element became fully visible during preparation for a Grand Slam final, revealing the culmination of all the practices I had observed throughout the year. My responsibilities that day included coordinating the precise sequence of preparation elements leading up to the match. What differed from previous occasions was that Djokovic invited me to observe a final practice he typically conducted alone, what his schedule simply called cue integration, implemented approximately 35 minutes before leaving for the court. When I entered the carefully prepared space, Djokovic was seated in a specific position, eyes closed, hands resting on his knees. On a small table beside him was an unusual item, a handwritten card containing what appeared to be a sequence of single words or short phrases, each written in a different color ink. As I watched, Djokovic engaged in a precisely structured practice that illuminated how all the preparation elements I had observed throughout the year came together into a functional competitive system. The practice involved systematically establishing what he later explained were state access cues, specific internal signals that would later activate particular performance patterns without requiring conscious attention during competition. Tennis happens too quickly for conscious technical management, he explained afterward as we walked to the transport. But optimal patterns don't maintain themselves automatically under pressure. This system creates internal cues that activate specific patterns without consuming attention. The practice I had witnessed involved systematically linking particular internal signals, certain breath patterns, specific attention position, precise physical sensation, to performance states that had been cultivated through his preparation practice. These weren't motivational triggers or focus cues as commonly used in sports psychology, but sophisticated access signals to specific neural organizations that supported optimal execution. Most revealing was how these cues were designed to function during competition. Rather than requiring conscious implementation, which would consume valuable attention, they were structured to activate automatically at specific competitive moments, between points, during court changes, at critical score juncture. Each cue activates a particular pattern established during preparation, Djokovic explained. Some reset attention distribution after attention narrowing. Others re-establish optimal autonomic balance following activation spikes. Some reconnect technical execution with intuitive understanding after analytical moments. This insight illuminated behaviors I had observed throughout the year but hadn't fully understood. The characteristic gestures between points, the specific breathing patterns during critical moments, the particular physical adjustments during changeover. These weren't nervous habits or superstition, but precisely designed activation signals for specific performance patterns that had been systematically established through his preparation practice. Most players attempt to consciously manage their state during matches, Djokovic noted as we neared the transport vehicle. That approach consumes attention that should be available for perception and decision. This system manages state through pre-established cues that activate automatically, preserving attention for competitive requirements. In the final that followed, I observed these mechanisms with new understanding. What commentators often described as Djokovic's mental toughness or focus wasn't primarily psychological fortitude, but reflected this sophisticated cueing system that maintained optimal performance patterns without requiring the conscious management that typically consumes attention and creates interference during high pressure. Most significant was how this system functioned during the match's most critical juncture. In pressure, moments where many players experience state deterioration, technical regression, attention narrowing, rhythm disruption, Djokovic's internal cues automatically activated specific patterns that maintained performance integration despite extreme competitive pressure. The difference isn't that I don't experience pressure, Djokovic explained during our return journey after his victory. It's that the cueing system maintains optimal patterns despite pressure. The feeling of pressure exists, but it doesn't disrupt the underlying organization that supports performance. This perspective transformed my understanding of what distinguished Djokovic in critical competitive moments. His legendary performance in pressure situations wasn't simply mental strength or emotional control, but reflected sophisticated system for maintaining specific performance patterns even when conscious attention was fully occupied with tactical requirements and competitive demand. The internal cueing system wasn't separate from the other practices I had observed throughout the year, but represented their functional integration, the mechanism through which patterns established during the morning calibration, sensory reset, environmental recalibration, relational attunement, and other preparation practice remained accessible during competition without requiring conscious management. As I completed my final month in the role, I understood that this integrated cueing system represented the culmination of Djokovic's preparation methodology, the mechanism that translated elaborate pre-match practice into functional competitive advantage without creating the interference typically associated with conscious performance management. And this insight helped explain what many considered the defining characteristic of Djokovic's career: his extraordinary performance in the most pressure-filled moments of the sport's biggest matches. His success in these situations wasn't simply competitive temperament or psychological resilience, but reflected sophisticated system for maintaining optimal performance patterns precisely when competitive pressure typically disrupts them. The internal cueing system wasn't a supplementary mental technique alongside physical and technical preparation. It was the integrative mechanism that allowed patterns established through preparation to express themselves during competition without the degradation typically caused by pressure, fatigue, or attention. As my understanding of this system deepened during that final month, I recognized its effects in virtually every aspect of Djokovic's competitive approach, from the characteristic between-point routines to the specific changeover behaviors to the particular response pattern following both successful and unsuccessful sequences. These weren't merely habits or rituals, but precisely designed mechanisms for maintaining performance integration throughout the continuous disruptions of elite competition. This wasn't the mental preparation I had been taught to recognize or support. It was something far more sophisticated, an integrated system for accessing and maintaining specific performance patterns without consuming the attention needed for tactical implementation and competitive response. And it helped explain how Djokovic had achieved one of the greatest pressure performance records in tennis history, not just through psychological strength, but through innovative approaches to state management that maintained optimal patterns precisely when conventional approaches inevitably produced degradation. Chapter 10. The Understanding. In my final week managing Djokovic's preparations, an unexpected situation provided the perfect synthesis of everything I had observed throughout the year, bringing into focus the essential nature of his approach to tennis performance. The situation arose when a respected sports science researcher visited to discuss potential collaboration on a project involving elite performance. As part of my responsibilities, I was coordinating logistics for this meeting, which included preparing relevant materials and ensuring appropriate timing within Djokovic's schedule. What I hadn't anticipated was that the conversation would evolve into a comprehensive articulation of Djokovic's entire methodology, one that connected all the elements I had observed into a coherent philosophical framework that fundamentally challenged conventional approaches to tennis performance. As I arranged materials in the meeting space, the researcher posed what seemed a simple question. What do you consider the most misunderstood aspect of elite tennis performance? Djokovic's response crystallized everything I had been witnessing. The fundamental nature of the activity, tennis isn't primarily what most people think it is. When the researcher asked him to elaborate, Djokovic provided a perspective that transformed my understanding of not just his methodology, but the nature of tennis itself. Tennis is conventionally understood as a physical contest involving technical skills executed under tactical framework. He began, sketching a diagram that resembled the preparation system I had observed throughout the year. That model creates a particular approach to development and preparation, focusing on physical capabilities, technical refinement, tactical understanding, and mental skills as separate domains to be developed and then integrated. He continued, articulating an alternative framework. But at the highest levels, tennis isn't primarily physical, technical, tactical, or even mental in the conventional. It's fundamentally perceptual and organizational, a continuous process of organizing perception and action within extraordinarily compressed timeframes under immense performance pressure. This perspective illuminated why the practices I had observed throughout the year differed so fundamentally from conventional approaches. Djokovic wasn't simply training physical capabilities, refining techniques, developing strategy, or building mental toughness as separate domains. He was systematically cultivating specific relationships between perception and organization that allowed optimal patterns to emerge under competitive conditions. The conventional model treats perception as information gathering and decision-making as separate from execution, he explained, elaborating his framework. But at competitive speeds, that serial processing is impossible. There's simply no time for see, decide, act, see. Performance must emerge from perception directly without the interference of analytical process. This insight revealed the underlying purpose of the practices I had been observing and supporting. The morning calibration, sensory reset, environmental recalibration, relational attunement, and other elements weren't separate techniques addressing different performance domains. They were integrated approaches to establishing specific perceptual organizational relationships that allowed tennis to emerge as direct expression rather than executed technique. The preparation isn't about getting ready to play tennis, Djokovic noted, articulating what in retrospect seemed obvious but had remained elusive. It's about establishing specific conditions where tennis can emerge without interference from the very mechanisms most people think are required to play: analytical decision-making, technical instruction, tactical implementation, and conscious execution. As the conversation developed, Djokovic outlined how this fundamental reframing had shaped his entire development as a player, from early technical training through his current preparation methodology. Most developmental approaches attempt to build more sophisticated decision-making and execution capabilities, he observed. The alternative is cultivating more direct relationship between perception and organization, reducing the interfaces between seeing and responding so performance emerges more immediately from competitive situations. This perspective transformed my understanding of the practices I had been supporting throughout the year. They weren't techniques for enhancing conventional performance variables, but methodologies for establishing conditions where tennis could emerge as direct expression rather than executed instruction, eliminating the interfaces between perception and action that create performance limitations even in highly trained athletes. Most revealing was how this framework illuminated the integration of Djokovic's entire preparations, explaining why each practice connected so precisely with others, and why the timing and sequence were as important as the practice themselves. The system isn't building separate capabilities that must be integrated during competition, he explained. It's establishing a specific quality of integration that allows capabilities to express themselves without interference. Each practice addresses a particular aspect of this integration, and together they create conditions where tennis emerges as direct expression rather than executed technique. This insight helped explain what many considered the most distinctive quality of Djokovic's play: a seamless integration of technical precision, tactical sophistication, physical capacity, and psychological stability that appeared as unified expression rather than coordinated components. This wasn't the result of superior integration of separately developed capacity, but reflected a fundamentally different approach that cultivated the integrated state directly. As the conversation concluded and the researcher departed, Djokovic noticed my thoughtful expression and offered a final observation that perfectly captured the essence of what I had been privileged to witness throughout the year. The practices may be elaborate or even esoteric when viewed individually, he noted, but they're addressing a simple truth. Tennis at its highest expression isn't something you do. It's something you allow to emerge when the right conditions are established. The preparation isn't about getting better at playing, it's about removing the interfaces that prevent tennis from expressing itself directly through you. This perspective illuminated everything I had observed, from the morning calibration that established foundational patterns to the sensory reset that transformed analytical information into intuitive understanding, to the environmental recalibration that created stable reference points amid variable conditions, to the relational attunement that established specific qualities of competitive interaction, to the internal cueing system that maintained these conditions during competition. Each represented an aspect of a comprehensive methodology for establishing conditions where tennis could emerge as direct expression rather than executed technique, eliminating the interfaces between perception and action that create performance limitations even in highly trained athletes. On my final day, as I completed the transition of my responsibilities as successor, I reflected on what I had been privileged to witness throughout the year. The Novak Djokovic, known to the public, was remarkable for his physical capabilities, technical precision, tactical sophistication, and mental toughness. But the Novak Djokovic I had observed daily was even more remarkable for something largely invisible to external view: a comprehensive methodology for establishing conditions where those capabilities could express themselves without the interference typically created by the very mechanisms most people consider essential to performance. This wasn't the preparation I had been taught to recognize or support, despite my background in high performance. It was something far more sophisticated, an integrated approach to removing the interfaces between perception and organization that limit performance even in elite athletes, allowing tennis to emerge as direct expression rather than executed instruction. And it helped explain how a player from a country with limited tennis infrastructure had risen to become one of the greatest champions in the sport's history, not just through physical talent or technical development, but through innovative approaches to performance integration that remained largely invisible to opponents, commentators, and even many within the tennis establishment. The small, silent rituals I had observed and supported throughout the year weren't supplementary practice alongside conventional preparation, but formed a comprehensive system for establishing conditions where tennis could express itself with minimal interference, where perception connected directly to organization without the limitations created by analytical process, conscious execution, or serial decision-making. In this lay the true significance of what I had witnessed, not just sophisticated preparation techniques, but a fundamental reframing of tennis itself, from an activity you do to an expression that emerges when the right conditions are established. And in that reframing lay insights not just about athletic performance, but about human capability more broadly, about the extraordinary possibilities that become available when we remove the interfaces between perception and expression that limit even the most highly developed capabilities. As I drove away from Djokovic's residence for the final time, I understood that what made his approach revolutionary wasn't the specific practice themselves, though they were remarkably sophisticated, but the fundamental reorientation they represented, from doing tennis to allowing tennis, from executing techniques to establishing conditions, from managing performance to removing interference. And in that simple yet profound shift lay not just the secret to his extraordinary success, but insights about human performance that extended far beyond the confines of a tennis court, insights about the nature of excellence itself and the unexpected pathways through which it might be accessed.